All right, well, hello students. This is our first official try at the flipped classroom. I'm pretty excited about it, and how this will work is I'm going to show you this presentation about content. You're going to take notes on it, and the expectation is best way to do this would be Cornell Notes if you're familiar with that, because you can just integrate your questions right in there as you review what you've written. But if you take notes in your own way, that's fine. But I would recommend that you write at least 3 questions that you have, either questions that you need clarifying on from me or other students. If you can't think of any questions, if I were to give you a quiz on this presentation after it was over, what do you think I would ask? That's kind of a nice way to think about what questions should I generate for next class. I will be asking you guys what questions you have for me so that we can just go over some clarifying things and talk about this. So that's the basics of the flipped classroom. This should only take, hopefully, about 10 minutes, and with the note taking and things, it might take 20. But the nice thing is you can stop this video whenever you need to. You can go back and revisit a topic you don't quite understand, and you can fast forward if you are looking to skip over information you already know. So there it is, and today our topic that we're covering is the rhetorical triangle. When I say that, I am referring to ethos, pathos, logos primarily. So there's one other term we will learn within the kind of time span of this presentation. We are going to start using these terms very heavily, and they're a little bit tricky to memorize off the bat. So I would have these notes out with you frequently as we're reading in class, because I want you to start calling things by their proper names as you see them in writing. We're going to start working with this next class, so be ready. Here we go. Maybe. There we go. All right, here's a nice visual for you to start us off. This is one of the nicer images I found on Google Image of the rhetorical triangle. So you can see it's an actual triangle, and in the middle there is kind of the ever-present purpose. So whatever the speaker or author or you, if you're in that position, are doing when you're delivering a message, you always have your purpose as the driving force behind that. At the top there, you can see it says ethos. On the bottom right-hand corner, pathos and logos, with some other terms that kind of are synonymous with those. So look at this for a while if you need to. You can pause it here. Maybe draw this if you're a visual person. But for now, I'm going to move on into each one of these and describe them a little bit more in depth. And you'll also need to take notes on that. So here we go. All right, first up is ethos. Now, I usually, in the order that I would say these, I would put ethos first, because it's establishing credibility is essentially what ethos is doing. If I were going to define on a test ethos, I would say establishing credibility. The speaker or writer, which could be you or it could be something that you're analyzing, another person's work, you always want to identify, are they making me trust them in some way? Ways to do this are emphasizing shared values, especially if the writer lacks any other proper credentials. So going back to how to write a book, that essay we read towards the, or sorry, how to mark a book, that essay we read towards the beginning of the year, he made it very clear at the beginning, right? He had PhD next to his name. At the beginning, he talked about how wonderful he is at doing these things that he was telling us we should do already. He threw in several references to kind of how intelligent he was by throwing in these elevated allusions. So he really, that's a good example of kind of promoting your credibility as an author. We should listen to you. We should trust you. Other things that establish credibility are one's reputation, their expertise in the material that they're discussing, their just general knowledge base or their knowledge in a particular field. Sincerity is one that really goes a long way. If you feel like this person is speaking from either experience or from their heart, we tend to kind of fall in love with that person as a writer, and we sort of are bought in immediately. So it gives the audience a reason to listen, and we're kind of bought into whatever evidence they're going to provide next. So there's ethos. Moving on. Next up is pathos. This is also known as the audience or the appeal. And the reason it's known as the audience is because pathos or your appeal really kind of is what buys them in more than anything, them being your audience. So pathos is making an emotional appeal. Again, if I were forced to write the definition in my own words of pathos on a test or something, I would write an emotional appeal. You're appealing to people's emotions, their values, their desires, their hopes, fears, or prejudices. Politicians, I think, in particular, are particularly good when they're making an argument to appeal to the things listed on that first bullet point there. Generally, they can be a bit insincere in nature, I think, or a bit too passionate, too driven by emotion, and less driven by logic or reason, which is, I guess, why it's pathos. It can be propagandistic or polemic, but it is very powerful. So really, this is where we get into the subjective if we're talking about tone. And people really throw all other points out the window. They wanna get out what they're feeling. They want to connect with the audience. They want to take you over to their side. And the best way to do that really is an emotional appeal. I shouldn't say the best, but really it's an effective way to do it. Excuse me. Sorry, you know I'm sick. All right, so it's often less formal in tone, and it's often has connotative vocabulary. If you don't know what connotative is, that would be a great question to ask me next class. Oh, here we go. Logos. This is also known as the message or the reasoning in an argumentative appeal. So this, if I had to write this on a test, would be logos equals logical argument. So this is where you want to write your evidence and things like that. So if you want to be an effective writer, incorporating logic into a text of your own, you always want to not only present your own evidence, but anticipate any objections or opposing views. And if you do that, it's called a counter argument that you would write, and it just recognizes that there are opposing views out there and that you have researched them. And as the third point suggests, it really strengthens your argument. If you can anticipate what the other side is going to say if you're in a debate or something, and you can have sort of a counter argument to that, or I'm sorry, refute what they're saying, you are building a very strong argument. And you know, the fact that you have researched the other side and you still have arrived at the conclusion that you agree with your position is a very powerful mechanism. And lastly, you can agree or concede is the sort of fancy term that we would want to use in our class, that an opposing argument may be true, but then you might provide some evidence that refutes that, the validity of that. I was having a conversation online on Facebook with a friend of mine about a sort of controversial issue, and we were going back and forth, and there were several times it was very respectful, our conversation, and there were several times that we conceded that, hey, you have a really good point there, but let me offer this different piece of evidence that might sway you a different way. So hey, maybe you'll even use this someday to have fun fights on Facebook. Look at that. All right, here we go. Last slide, I believe. The last piece of the puzzle here we will refer to much less often because kairos is sort of one of those terms that I don't know that the AP test will throw at you, but in case it does, kairos is referring to the purpose or the rhetorical situation. In Greek, the actual kind of rough translation of kairos is the right or opportune moment. So if you're thinking about soaps, occasion would be the closest one here. It considers the speaker, the audience, the topic, the occasion. If you know these elements first and let that guide you, you can build a strong case. And it's sort of, the kairos is ever present. It's sort of looming over all of those other elements of argumentation there. So this is sort of just ever present there. Um, okay, so now we have these kind of terms and their definitions down. We're going to be looking next class at some rhetorical situations, actually. So you'll be put in a group and you'll be presented with a situation in your group. And you're going to have to make appeals to us, emotional, logical. You're going to have to show your credibility, and you're going to have to try and persuade us to believe you and come over to your side. So study up on these. Be familiar with the term and their definition because you're really going to start applying these immediately, next class. Okay? So I'm at 10, almost 11 minutes. I think that's about good. This whole thing should take you about 20. And that doesn't sound too bad as far as length of homework time goes. So anyway, have a great weekend or night, depending on if you're A or B day, and we will see you next class. Thanks, guys.